Saram, Janine, thank you so much for taking the time out to interview with us today. We're really grateful to be doing this and very keen to hear your experiences. So the first question I have for you is, how did you actually come into the Sai group?
Yeah, and this is a very interesting question, and it has a very interesting answer too. I sometimes am still amused about it. My husband and I, we were living in the Netherlands, both professional people, and we traveled overland as was very common in the 70s for young people to travel. We traveled overland through all the major world religions, as it turned out later on, through Afghanistan and Pakistan and Greece, and then we ended up in India. And because we had a camper van, we're trying to sell that in Nepal. And there we came in touch with a Buddhist Lama, a Tibetan Lama. And he came in with the request of wanting to buy our camper van, but actually the real agenda became very clear. He had a very charged energy about him. So we asked him what was his tradition, because we had been to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lived at that time, and I was particularly inspired by Buddhism, and so was my husband actually. So he then said that he had been taught in Lhasa in Tibet by the teachers there from 4 or 5 years of age. Anyway, he took us under his wings, and we spent a lot of time with him, a month first, and then we went away, traveled some more and came back. And he was a very psychic sort of man as well, with limited English, but very psychic in his perception. So he did a lot of what they call paranormal powers. And when we left the final time to go to Australia, he asked us one more time, could he read our palms? And so he did. And surprisingly to us, he said, a man called Sai Baba will become very important to you. And so we said, who is that? Tell us, what is this? Is he a Buddhist? And he said, I don't know much about him, but I believe he is like Jesus Christ. He can materialize things, and he is very healing and very loving. I'm just giving you this message because that's what's coming through for me. But this is the message. So we went the next morning to the Kathmandu bookshop, and we got a book on Sai Baba. They had one book there, and it had a depiction of Swami on the front in his orange robe and his halo of hair. And we were like, don't think that's for us, really. It just seemed a bit, in that time, there were a lot of Americans that would go to Maharishi, and so that he was known as the ice cream god. So we decided, no, we don't think this is for us. So we traveled on, and we had a great practice in the Buddhist tradition, meditation and so forth. And then when we arrived in Australia, we tried to contact people here to see if there were any Sai devotees. And we were collecting gradually more and more books about Swami, because they were, in that time, Howard Murford and Sandwei's book on Man of Miracles, Sai Baba and the Psychiatrist. So we collected a number of books already, but it was still, we don't know. And then actually a catalyst was that my mother-in-law, so my husband's mum, came, and she said, didn't you tell me about a special teacher that was important for you? Why are you not following that? We said, it's not really what we like. Anyway, that night we got that book out, the book Sai Baba and the Holy Man and the Psychiatrist. And it was amazing. We both cried and felt like, this is so true. This is such an interesting description of Swami. And it was particularly important because my husband and I both worked in mental health. My husband was a psychiatric social worker, and I was a psychiatric nurse. So it was our field. He was a psychiatrist, so he was talking in language that meant a lot to us. So then we lived in a small town in South Australia, Mount Gambier, and we were writing all over the world trying to contact people that had anything to do with Sai Baba, maybe Howard Murford, and wrote to America and so forth. And nothing eventuated. For a whole year we were in the lone bush by ourselves there. And then my husband had a transfer to an even smaller place, and I had an urgent medical appointment to this practice, and I walked in the room and the walls were covered in pictures of Swami. So I said, "Oh my goodness, you know of Sai Baba?" And he said, "You do too?" So we then, I went home and he rang afterwards and said, "Have you got any books? Can I come around?" So we developed a friendship with him, and they had already, his wife, this was Dr. Vitti, and his wife, they had already been to the ashram. And so they encouraged us to go. So we went in 1980 for Dasara. We were there, and it was a very important meeting. But I guess to the next question, how did you then feel about the whole experience, was leading up to us going, this Dr. Vidyananda, and he'd taken a lot of, the movies without sound, I don't know what it's called, something with 8 in it. He'd taken a lot of movies, and so we were watching those movies, and I was looking at that and thinking, there's these thousands of people. They must be deluding themselves that they think that he's looking at them or is pointing at them. How can that be? It's impossible, really. So I had a grave doubt about whether people indeed were kind of, fair dinkum about, as they say in Australia, fair dinkum about that experience with Swami. So I think it was one of the first mornings that I was there, and I must admit I was incredibly overwhelmed with the whole setup of the ashram, and the Sevadals in that time, they were pretty fierce and they were telling us off. And so I was kind of shaking as I sat down in the sand. It was in that time, like we know in the ashram, there was an outside area, and I was sitting in the sand. And there was music going on, I think, and then all of a sudden it became very quiet. It's actually something that still happened when Swami was there. And this floating figure came past, and it was the hush when he first came out, and then the silence as he walked on. And he walked past the area where I was sitting, and there were a lot of people there. He walked past the area I was sitting, and he looked at me, and I knew for sure he looked at me. So all my doubts about how can they know that he's looking at, they were gone. And he looked at me with such love. I still cry about that now. Just this incredible feeling of that I was loved. And that had not been my experience. I had quite a lot of, I guess, negative feelings about myself and self-criticism. So I just fell to the ground and cried and felt overwhelmed with that now. And that's still a very strong current now when I feel, oh, where is Swami? Or I'm not really in the groove, as we all kind of do at times. That memory of him looking at me in that particular way with that incredible love was so incredibly memorable and potent. So then that was in 1980, and we're still here. We've been going many times. We've had many interviews. Even on that first visit, we had an interview. So that was a very special experience.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Just such an amazing recap. I feel like I was living through it because you just explained it so beautifully. That was so amazing. Again, thank you so much. Well, leading on to that was 1980, and you're still here, as you said. Since then, what impact has, like seeing Swami in that way and also just being involved in the organization had in your life?
Well, it's been a very, if you like, confidence-building experience. In one of the interviews, Swami did that usual thing of, the foundation of the house is the self-confidence and the self-sacrifice, and that So he explained that. Actually, one of the things that was very interesting in our first interview was my husband is a much more talkative person, and I'm usually a little bit shy. But in that interview, I felt so familiar with him, as if I'd known him all my life. I felt like I could swap recipes with him or talk about hairdos or whatever. He was so such a friendship person to me. And in that interview, in that first interview, he explained a lot of the philosophy that he says now, love all, serve all, and all those sorts of things. And I guess I knew them already from having read the books, but the way he talked about it in such an almost like a childlike way, that's achievable to anyone. Don't worry about it. That was so reassuring. So that confidence I took with me and is still with me. And over the years, I have taken up quite a number of leadership positions, and I was trained as a nurse. So I did a lot of work in palliative care, and I found that in particular very helpful in understanding some of the teachings about impermanence and, how quickly a life is over and what is really important at the end of life. So I learned a lot about that and felt often that Swami was with us. And we have 3 daughters, and they've also come to a number of the visits that we made to Puttaparthi, and they would stay in the ashram as well. And they also had their own experience. One time we actually came when I was quite heavily pregnant with Surya, our middle daughter. And in that interview, Swami pointed at my oldest daughter, who actually poked her tongue out at Swami and said, "Don't do that." But she was so taken by that. And then we came home and we had actually bought a number of the pictures of Swami, and one of them had him pointing like this. So she still looks at that picture now and says, "Oh yeah, I know how he said that to me." So the effect of having Swami in our life has meant, especially for me, it's meant that service has been very important to me. I must say some of the Indian expression of the spiritual world is foreign to me and remains still foreign to me. I love listening to the Vedas, but I wouldn't be able to say them. I love the bhajans, and I do sing now. So that has had a lasting effect, but there's still an unfamiliarity because it's not my culture necessarily. But how Swami has played a role is in many, many situations where I felt stretched or worried, I felt that he was right there. And lots of miraculous things have happened where I was maybe worried about a medical emergency and he would just give me an intuition that I just thought, wow, I'd never thought of that. Or later on in life, I trained as a psychologist, and lots of times when maybe people were violent or almost violent, I just felt this incredible calm come over me. And I think also one of the things that my clients were often talking about, that they felt that Swami had given me a beautiful voice, a calming voice. And so I made a lot of meditation tapes for people to listen to and podcast later on. So that the challenge in that was to make it generic and not to talk in a devotional way about Swami. You can do that amongst the Sai people. But one of my passions has been, because I just feel it's so incredibly powerful to me, to also bring that message of Swami's love and the teachings into the more secular world. I wish that everyone could know about this. And I think I felt that was an urge that I had to make it accessible. And the psychology that I studied was by an Italian psychiatrist who also gave a lot of credit to that we are spiritual beings as well. Contrary to Freud, who talked about that we were mainly driven by our urges and our instincts, this psychiatrist, his name is Assagioli, he talked about that people are like a house where you have a basement where the instincts and the intuitions might be there, and a lot of problems might be rumbling away. There are fears and our repressed memories, but there's also ground floor where we do the TikTok things. Maybe we do the routine things such as, reciting mantras and so forth. That's helpful for us. But there's also bedrooms where we might be doing dreaming, and we might get in our dreams answers of things that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And there is in his description also a sunroof where we can stand and look out into the big, vast universe and realize our connection with that. And so he talks very much about our job as a person is to develop a stairway in that house so that you can go to the cellar and maybe discover some things from your childhood or fears that you've had and transform them by taking them to higher levels. So that type of psychology really blend very well with Swami's teachings for me. So that's the effect it's had on me. Yeah. Long story.
Yeah. Once again, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was really beautiful. And I could really see how you've grown as a person with your recounts of, since having Swami in your life. And yeah, I feel like it's pretty relatable for a lot of us as well. And yeah, it's just, again, very beautiful. Thank you so much for interviewing with us, and Sai Ram.